This fall, bring the beauty of the Rabbit Room into your own community with House Moot. It's a self-hosted gathering where your living room, church, or backyard becomes a place for shared stories, songs, and sacred conversations. With recorded sessions, recipes, activities, discussion questions, and a gathering guide, we'll set the table for you. All you have to do is bring the guests. Get everything you need to host your own House Moot at rabbitroom.com/housemoot.
I learned that my identity is not in what happens with what comes out at the end of my pen, but is actually in my ability to sit back and listen and to wait. And if I just follow that, if I could just not forget to do that, because it's so easy to forget to do that, I think.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Judith McQuoid lives in Belfast, Northern Ireland, the hometown of C.S. Lewis, or Jax as he was known when he lived there. Inspired by Belfast, her love of Lewis, and her own family history, Judith wrote a middle grade novel about young Jax Lewis and an imagined friendship with a boy from a very different background. It's a book about creativity, friendship, and the ways we can give one another a little more courage and a little more hope. It was my pleasure to talk to Judith McQuoid about her new novel, Giant. Judith McQuoid, I'm so glad to have you on the Habit Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
So your new book is Giant?
That's right.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, so it's set in Belfast in the years 1908 to 1910, and it's about two boys growing up in Belfast who are kind of thrown together. Davy is a shipyard boy, so from a working class background, and it's the story of his imagined friendship with the young C.S. Lewis, who back then, and actually still now in Belfast, was known as Jax.
Hmm.
And
the
it's
locals still call him Jax.
They do, yeah. They will correct you if you call him Jack. They will correct you and say, "No, he's Jax."
Really?
Yeah.
So you've been in Belfast most of your life. Is that fair to say?
No, probably not, actually. We lived in Northern Ireland until I was 7, and then we moved to the States for 7 years, and then we moved to England. I came back here to go to university, but then moved back to England, and we only permanently moved back to Northern Ireland in 2011.
Oh, okay. All right. So have you noticed a difference in, I've heard that people in the UK aren't as interested in C.S. Lewis as Americans. Right. Have you noticed an increased interest in C.S. Lewis in Belfast since you've been there?
Yeah, there was, so what date would that have been? There was an anniversary probably of his birth. That would have been 1998. So since about 1998, there has been a little bit of an increase in interest. It's still not enough, I would say. I think it was Seamus Heaney who said, like in the 1980s or the 1990s, he said it was, a revelation to him at that time that Lewis was even Irish. Yeah. So it's still not as big a deal as I would like it to be.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that because most of us think of Lewis as a Oxford, Cambridge. He had that plummy accent.
Sure.
And you, in this book, spend a lot of time thinking about the extent to which Northern Ireland, shaped his imagination. And tell me about that. I mean, the floor is open.
Okay.
However you want to talk about that, I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think Lewis himself never considered himself as English. He always thought of himself as Irish. And I think other people saw him as Irish as well. Obviously, Oxford was a massive part of his life. Oxford and Cambridge were huge parts of his life, and he loved Oxford. There's this quote from Lewis where he said that I think he was talking to another Irishman, and he said that his idea of heaven would be Oxford in County Down, which was one of his favourite areas here. But I think it had a huge, and he left here when he was very young, but he kept coming back here. When he was at school, he was back here for every school holiday. When he was an adult, he was back here at least once a year, throughout his life, right up until he died. And I think, particularly for me, when I read the Narnia stories, I now read them looking for places and things and events that are Northern Irish, and I think they are peppered with references to Ulster. And I don't know if I think some of that must have been conscious. I think some of it was probably subconscious, but it's really interesting as a Northern Irish person now living back in Northern Ireland, particularly, to read Narnia and just to have those little things pop up at you and think, oh my goodness, I know what that is.
What are some examples?
So one of the most obvious examples is Cair Paravel. So Lewis, in his holidays with his mum, one of the places that they went to quite a bit was the north coast of Ireland, and there are a couple of places on the north coast of Ireland that clearly influenced the idea of Cair Paravel. So Dunluce Castle is one of my favorite places on the planet, and I have loved that place since I was tiny. It's an incredible ruin of a castle from the 1600s that is still standing there on the edge of a cliff. The kitchen at one point, I think in the Victorian times, fell into the water. And it's just incredibly atmospheric. And when you read Prince Caspian, particularly when the four siblings come on Cair Paravel, but they don't realise what it is because it's in ruin. It's so Dunluce Castle. The other place that I think probably did influence Lewis's imagination is Downhill Domain, which is not far from Dunluce, a little bit further west. Now, at the time when Lewis was a child, Downhill Domain actually would have been occupied. It wasn't in ruin, but it is ruin now. And throughout his life, Lewis probably witnessed that decline of that particular house, which again is a big sort of manor house near a cliff edge. So you're drawing
a parallel between that and Cair Paravel also?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think both of those probably influenced his imagination.
Yeah. Tell me about his. He had a nursemaid, Lizzie, I think. Tell me about her.
Yeah, Lizzie. Yeah, Lizzie was from Donegal, and seems to have been very well versed in like Irish fairy tales, Irish folk tales. So she was telling him those folk tales from when he was very young. She went on holiday with them to Castle Rock, which is at the north coast, and took them to Downhill Domain, this old house that fell into ruin. And I and lots of other people think that she did have, and those stories did have, a big impact on him as a child.
Does she appear in your book, Giant?
She doesn't. No, she was earlier. Yeah, she was. Lewis was quite young when Lizzie was part of their household.
Yeah. Well, tell me about where this book, your book, came from. I mean, what made you decide it'd be fun to write a story about juvenile Jax Lewis?
Yeah, so I grew up with, my dad was pretty obsessed with C.S. Lewis. I think his interest started during the war with his radio talks. But then...
Wow, so your dad remembers the radio talks that became Mere Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah, so he heard those on the radio during the war. And Belfast was very badly affected by the war. After London, it was the most bombed city.
Really?
Yeah. Not a lot of people know. Yeah.
No, that's the first I've heard of that. I guess because of all the shipyards there?
Yes, yeah. So when we moved to America during that time, my dad was reading me the Narnia books at night as bedtime stories. And my
Your
dad,
first exposure to the Narnia books was in the United States instead of over there?
Yeah, in Amarillo, Texas. Yeah. And he was a performer. Do you know, he was a Methodist minister. He was very good in the pulpit, but he was also a comedian. Do you know, and he loved performing, and he would do all the voices, and it was quite the experience. But sometimes when he had closed the book and he was about to turn off the light, he would turn around and say to me, "Don't you forget he was a Belfast boy." And that. My dad was a Belfast boy. My dad was born and bred Belfast. And I think that got in my head. And thinking back now, I think my dad was only really realizing Lewis's Irishness at that point in his life. Obviously, he knew that Lewis was Irish, but I think he was. So the copy of Surprised by Joy that I have that belonged to my dad is an American copy. So I think that he was kind of delving into Lewis's biography at about the same time as he was reading me Narnia. So when my dad passed away, I felt the need for story to console myself. So I started looking into my dad's family history, which I'd never really done. But I was also looking at Lewis's time in Ireland. And then it suddenly dawned on me that my grandfather, my dad's dad, who I'd never known, and C.S. Lewis had been born in the same part of Belfast at about the same time.
Wow.
And that just went off like a firework in my head. Like I got out a map and I was looking to see how far away the two boys were. And, there they were, just, within walking distance of each other. So that's where it started.
And so Davy, the friend of Jackson in the novel, is his situation in any way similar to your grandfather's situation?
In some ways, yes. There's probably more fiction in Davy's part of the story than there is in Jack's. Because I don't know a lot about my grandfather. I don't know a lot about his childhood. But I know that he lived in the shipyard area of Belfast, but somehow managed to avoid working in the shipyard. So there are some bits and pieces in there that are gleaned from his life.
Yeah. Lewis's grandfather was kind of a higher up in one of the shipyards. Is that right?
He owned a shipyard. Yes, a small shipyard. Yeah, he owned Lewis, McQuoid and Lewis. It was known as the Wee Shipyard, and then Harland and Wolff, which built Titanic. It was known as the Big Shipyard.
You said the Wee Shipyard.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Judith, as I have thought about your research and your book, especially hearing that your first exposure to Narnia was in Amarillo, Texas, which is so funny to me. A theme that's sort of emerging is displacement. You got exposed to this Belfast boy when you went far away from Belfast. The thought of Lewis displaced from this sort of magical place he grew up. And I mean, of course, Oxford is plenty magical itself, but it was not his home.
Yeah.
And in his thinking back to the Irish folktales, the Irish landscapes, there's something about that displacement that seems significant. Tell me about that. Did you? We were talking before we started recording about the idea that how often writers are they're writing about where they grew up, not while they're there, but when they've left.
Yeah, and I think that idea of displacement is very much part of our history as a race. The Irish have immigrated all over the world for various reasons. Sure. And I think sometimes the Irish feel more Irish when they leave Ireland. They cling to their Irishness. And I think that was the case for Lewis. he loved Irish literature. He loved W.B. Yeats in particular. And I think he really clung to Irishness as an identity. I certainly, when we were living in Texas, which was so different from where we had come from, the culture shock was, profound for all five of us. I think those stories, which now I realize are so Irish, I think those Narnia stories were comforting to me because they reminded me of home, as well as other writers like Ellen Montgomery. I was looking for stories that reminded me of home. But I think if you look at the biography of a lot of writers are displaced, and a lot of them, that displacement kind of kicks you out of your own culture and forces you to have to sit back and watch and learn a bit more maybe than if you were feeling comfortable in your own culture, I think.
Yeah. I know I'm always writing little stories about Warner Robins, Georgia, where I grew up. And I've wondered before, if I were living there, would I feel the need to write it down? It would just kind of be every day if I still lived there. Although the sort of, you could say that we're always, as adults, we're always displaced from the world of our childhood.
Right.
But I don't think I would write as many stories about Middle Georgia if I were still there.
Yeah, it makes you consider your own roots differently, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's, you remarked that Irish people feeling more Irish when they are away from Ireland. I know when I'm, say, in Washington, D.C. or visiting New York City, I run into somebody from the South. I say, let's talk. And I'm like, I'm surrounded by people from the South all the time. Why do I want to talk to them?
Yeah. And Lewis, in Oxford, Lewis was always looking for Irish people.
Yeah.
He was always seeking out Irish people. Coghill, I think, was one of the Inklings, and he was from County Cork, I think.
Yeah.
So he was always really happy to find an Irishman in Oxford.
Yeah. Judith, you have been how long have you been working on this book?
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, but it has had many different forms. So when I started writing it, I was writing it as a screenplay. But it turns out I don't know how to write screenplays. So then I decided to go back to what I had a vague idea about. So I started writing it as a story.
Yeah. Did you always know it was a novel, or did you start it as a short story?
No, I always knew it was going to be a novel. Yeah. I don't know how to write short stories.
By the way, why is this book called Giant?
Yeah. It wasn't originally it was called Davy and Jack's. And then my publisher asked me to think about different names. So we kind of semi-settled on the Giant of Belfast, but then we thought that was maybe too geographically tied. So I like the fact that it's just called Giant. It could, of course, refer to C.S. Lewis himself. There are lots of giants in Irish mythology, which come up in the story. And the shipyard in Belfast is also associated with giants because of what they create is so giant. So there's a few different reasons.
Yeah. And tell me about these. You mentioned that it's about a friendship between these two boys, but there's also this sort of, I don't know if you call it, would you call it magical realism? What would you call this element of?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yes. Yeah, I think it steps right up to the edge of magical realism. I think so. One of the major changes that happened to this book along the way came as a result of a workshop with you in The Habit and 3 other members of The Habit. And one of the things you said about it was you don't need those magical creatures in there, because originally it did have a lot of fantastical creatures in it. And after about a week, when I'd recovered from you saying that, I sat down to look at it, and I mean, I thought it was going to take me months to remove that layer of fantastical creatures, and it only took me weeks. They kind of clicked off the rest of the manuscript. Really, it was weird.
Huh.
And I was able to rewrite it and replace a lot of those fantastical creatures. Got replaced with the books that Jax and Davy are reading together. The books that C.S. Lewis actually read when he was a child. So they kind of imagine using those books as sort of a springboard for their imaginations, but it never steps over the line into magical realism, I don't think. But just right up to the edge.
Yeah. And which books Lewis read from just reading Surprised by Joy? I mean, how do you know what books he read?
Yeah, from his letters and from Surprised by Joy. Yeah, so Beatrix Potter was a big favorite. He loved Mark Twain. Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. He says that was his first introduction to King Arthur. Would you believe it?
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And Jonathan Swift, obviously, Gulliver's Travels is a big influence. And that's the other reason why it's called Giant, because there's a mountain that looms over Belfast that is supposed to have inspired Gulliver's Travels whenever Jonathan Swift spent some time here.
Is it a giant in repose?
Yes. Yeah.
I think there's a mountain that's described as a giant in repose and silver chair, isn't there?
You could be right about that. I don't actually know. That's another thing. I need to look at that.
That's fun to think about him being influenced by Mark Twain, or at least that he read Mark Twain.
Yeah.
And I always like to point out that Beatrix Potter was influenced by Uncle Remus. The Burr Rabbit stories.
Really?
Yeah, she read those and loved the pictures. Now I can't remember the name of the illustrator who did those pictures of Burr Rabbit and Burr Fox.
Oh wow!
And so she's so. You think of what could be more British than Beatrix Potter, but it's fun to think that she practiced. She did some illustrations of Burr Rabbit.
No way.
Before she, decided to make her rabbit a little English rabbit.
I did not know that. I love that. I absolutely love that. I've spent 3 or 4 years ago. We spent some time. We spent a week very near where Beatrix Potter lived, swimming in her lake and was hanging out at her cottage. And that's a million miles away from Brer Rabbit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And of course, Burr Rabbit was the next county over from Flannery O'Connor.
Of course, yeah.
So I think now we found out that Flannery O'Connor influenced C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. Yeah, we knew we'd get there.
We'd get there eventually, yeah. Okay, now, would you mind telling the story of the arduous journey of this book to publication?
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a roller coaster, really. So I thought my book was ready, sort of 2019 time. So I sent it out to a publisher, and the first one said yes.
The first one?
So the first one, yeah. So early 2021, that was. I signed a contract. They said it would take about 2 years, as it normally does. So we were kind of working on it, but not a lot. And then a couple of months before it was due to be published, they emailed me and said that because of their financial situation, they weren't going to be able to publish it anymore. So I was back to square one, really. So I went from being debut writer back to housewife in the course of reading an email, which was, it taught me a lot about identity and what you rest in. But it was good for me. I picked myself up off the ground and I got myself an agent. And he started sending it out, and then eventually, about a year later, my Irish publisher opened for submissions for 2 weeks, and we got it in, and they said they loved it. So I've ended up with this wonderful, small but mighty Irish publisher. I think this is the first time anything about Lewis has been published in the Republic of Ireland.
Wow.
And back in 1917, Lewis was writing to his Belfast friend Arthur, and he said that he would love for his stuff to be published in Dublin, which never happened, obviously. So yeah, it's interesting.
So your publishing house is in Dublin. It's in the Republic of Ireland, not Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
Are there publishers in Belfast and Northern Ireland?
There are small publishers. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to tell me more about what you learned about identity from getting your book dropped.
Yeah. So that day, the email day, I don't know what I was doing in the morning, but I really felt that I should go out in the garden. We had a tent. I think we were having a heat wave. Sometimes it's easier because we don't have aircon, right? So we sometimes it's easier to sleep outside than it is inside, when it's really hot. We had a tent outside in the garden, and I just felt that I should go outside and just sit in the tent. And as I entered the tent, I just felt the presence of God really, really powerfully. And I just felt like everything was going to be okay, even though I thought everything was okay. And then it was later on that evening when I got the email from the publisher to say they weren't going to be able to do it. And I immediately connected that to what had happened earlier on in the day in the garden. So I had this really funny reaction to that email where I was upset, but also, oh, hang on, this is an adventure that I'm on. This is like I am letting go of something I thought was set in place for me. I have to let go of that, and I have to not hold on to that. And in the process of getting it out to other publishers, that whole whirlwind of submissions, you learn that if you don't get it published, it's okay. That actually you learn to listen. I think I learned, I'm really impatient by nature. And I have learned through that whole experience the wonders of waiting on the Lord. Of just saying, I am inadequate and insufficient for this. And I will lay this down if you want me to. But actually, every single time I offered to lay it down, he told me to pick it back up again, every single time. So I think I learned that my identity is not in what happens with what comes out at the end of my pen, but it's actually in my ability to sit back and listen and to wait. And if I just follow that, if I could just not forget to do that, because it's so easy to forget to do that, I think.
Yeah. When you talk about waiting, to what extent is that relevant to the actual creative process? And to what extent are you just talking about the sort of, I mean, obviously with regard to publishing and things like that, I see how that applies. Maybe that's what you're talking about, but are you talking about the actual work of writing also?
Yeah, I think I probably am. not just writing, but also editing, I find. Maybe even more so in the editing process. So it's things like I really wanted the two boys in the story to go and see an early film together, like a silent film. And I really wanted them to go and see a Georges Méliès movie. So I started looking at Georges Méliès movies, and then I discovered that he made a movie of Gulliver's Travels. And Gulliver's Travels was already in there. And I just thought that, but it felt like that just landed in my lap, during the editing process. That it's like a waiting, but then also a discovering kind of thing. And I suppose that waiting, there is something about finding treasure that is like waiting as well, And
Tell me more about that.
I find the writing process is a discovery process. Feels more like discovery to me than creating. It feels more like the more I just put pen to paper, the more that I am pushing on doorways, the more that things are given to me. And that it's sometimes that is out of my own imagination, my own experiences, you can see that in there, but there are also things in there. I mean, sometimes I read that story back and I think, how did I get to that? And I think some of those things I was given.
Yeah. I'm actually going to be talking to somebody later this morning in another podcast. I ran across an idea in a book by Warren Kinghorn, who he pointed out that for Plato, an idea was something outside you. And so if I have an idea, it's really that something in my mind is conforming itself to a reality that's outside. And since, the Enlightenment or whatever, we've come to think of an idea as something that happens inside your head.
Right. Yeah.
And I think I think what you're talking about there may be relevant to that, that you, of course, there's something going on inside your head when you have these ideas. But maybe it's not just going on inside your head.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I love this Tolkien's idea of the cauldron of story as well, that, we absorb our culture and we absorb all those stories that we read and we absorb all our experiences. And then when we write, all of that pours out of us somehow. A family member has recently read Giant and has said how much of our family, like my childhood family, how much it feels like that. And I had no idea that it would feel like that,
Yeah. I wonder, when you speak of all your cultural influences going to that cauldron, this isn't a question. I don't know what it is. Maybe you have something to say about it. Your cultural experience just from being across the ocean from me, we had there's plenty of overlap in our cultural experience. We've read a lot of the same books and that kind of thing. But I wonder what that means, how that makes its way out into what you've written, because I love that insight that your family member said that this feels like of course it does. What else what else are you going to write?
Yeah. And I think it's sometimes it's tiny things, isn't it? I think as writers, we get really fruitful when we focus on tiny things.
Tell me about that.
So I spend a good chunk of my morning, did it this morning, walking the same lane with my collie dog. And there is some sort of connection between how much attention I pay to what stage the cow parsley is at, how green the grass is, where the oak leaves are at, and my creative productivity later on in the day. There is some sort of connection between that focus on small, beautiful things and my creativity. And I don't understand, but it's as if that focus on the small and the beautiful creates fertility somehow in my imagination. Yeah. And it also connects me to my childhood, because that lane I walk in the morning is the same sort of lanes I walked when I was a kid. And it connects me back to my childhood. And I think the same thing was happening with Lewis. You know, I think he was writing out of the leaf mold of his mind, out of all of those Irish and English experiences, to create something beautiful.
I'm interested in thinking about what's the relevance of the fact that it's the same lane every day that you're walking. You know, and that's where you get to start noticing the small things. Yeah. And you know, when you go on tour, you know, when you're a tourist, you're noticing the big, you know, there's the pyramid, and there's Big Ben, you know, and when you walk the same lane every day, and there's nothing big to notice anymore that you haven't noticed before, you start noticing the little things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I noticed that process in me actually during lockdown, because as a family we were walking the same lanes because there was nothing else to do, because we were geographically confined. We weren't allowed to leave the village or whatever. But suddenly we knew at what time of the year the cow parsley comes in bloom, and when the speedwell flowers come in bloom. And we were brought back to that simplicity of nature and of seasons and of growth and of slowness. It was a beautiful thing, I think.
Yeah, I had the same experience here. Started noticing, you know, which kind of birds live here. Yeah. All right. Well, that's so good. Thank you, Judith. I want to hear from you. Hopefully you were ready for this question. Who are the writers that make you want to write?
So I could say Lewis and Tolkien, but actually I find them quite intimidating. Yeah. And if I spent too long thinking about the wonders of their work, then I probably never would write. So I'm going to say Ella Montgomery, because she was a massive influence on me as a child as well. And she reminded me of home, and she feels much more attainable. And I'm actually going to say also, I don't read much nonfiction, but I love anything that Catherine Rundle writes about writing. So her tiny little book called Why You Should Read Children's Fiction, but even though you are so old and wise, is just fantastic. Okay. Absolutely brilliant. And just makes me want to write as many hours in a day as I can.
Is Catherine Rundle the one who wrote the John Donne book?
Yes, I think she is. Yeah, she's an Oxford scholar. Yeah, but she also writes children's fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right, I'm glad you mentioned her.
No, she's amazing on children's fiction.
Okay. Give me just a couple of things from that book that got you excited.
That children's fiction is about things like wonder and awe that aren't always in adult fiction. And that they are about, children's fiction is about empathy and about experiencing the world. Not only do you get to experience somebody else's world either geographically or, a fantastical landscape, but you're also experiencing them and their life. And it just is so mind expanding to be able to do that.
Well, Judith McQuoid, I'm so excited about this book coming out. And congratulations, and I hope a whole bunch of people read it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jonathan.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.